is getting a lot worse very quickly. And we have been, as I said, over the course of this day, analyzing a whole lot more information and trying to assess where it's going. And it's certainly very, very sobering. So I'm not ruling anything out, but I think the smart thing for New Yorkers to recognize, we're going to make each announcement the second it's ready. But I don't want to project something until we're sure. But everything, literally every option is on the table right now. Yeah.
How do you protect these I mean, I've talked to so many workers who are servers, or in the service industry,
Sure.
or gig workers, and some of them can't apply for unemployment because they're not full time, or there's just no safety net for them, and they're getting laid off because they're not needed at their restaurants. Have you been in talks with Senator Schumer or the feds or
Yes.
the state? I mean, their states, California now, Ohio, Illinois, are shutting down bars and restaurants.
Yep.
Now, it's probably inevitable that that's going to happen. So what protections are going to be there?
Senator Schumer and I have definitely talked about what needs to be in the next stimulus bill. And this is exactly the kind of thing we've talked about, that it has to go much deeper into the workforce and provide a lot more income replacement for a lot longer. Look, this is the great unknown. We haven't seen something like, think doctors, you agree, we haven't seen something like this in the United States of America since 1918. So literally over a century. We're in a whole different reality than 1918. Thank God we do have a lot of advantages compared to them. But on the other hand, we're dealing with the great unknown. We're literally dealing with a disease that they still don't know entirely how it works. There's no cure, there's no vaccine. So we've got to recognize the sheer magnitude. But even though that's the only parallel you can find to this pandemic and the experience in America, there is a positive example of helping people in crisis across the board, and we actually lived it. And a lot of people are walking around today who are part of it, and it's called the New Deal. It actually happened, where the federal government determined that it would, in that instance, employ people outright and provide every conceivable form of financial support, and it saved this country. This is a different situation physically, right? You obviously have to make sure people get through the immediate crisis, but this is a crisis that will end. One of the things we talked about today is the fact that over time, this disease will reach its high point and then will start to recede. It will end. But the financial, the economic, the human impact has only just begun, and it will go long past the point where we say the immediate crisis with the disease is over. The federal government has the power to address that, to borrow some of the tools of the New Deal and use them in our time. And they have the power to get ahead of the medical crisis by ensuring that the supplies we need are there. We're all talking about ventilators. We're here in the biggest city in the country. We right now are an island. If we don't get help from the federal government to get those ventilators that we need going forward, we will simply run out. Right now we have a strong supply, and we're looking for any more we can get. But there's going to be a point where if we don't get help from the federal government, if we don't get help from the military, we will simply run out. There's still time to fix that. Yeah.
Two questions. The first is for Chancellor Carranza. Can you describe what this will look like? Teachers, will they be teaching from home? Are kids expected to be in front of a computer, normal school hours? Are they going to get grades? Are attendance going to be taken?
You got it. How much will it be like regular school?
It's not going to be like regular school. I mean, it's impossible to create those conditions again, which is why I said it's going to look different in different places with different teachers, different subject areas, different grade levels, etc. What we want to be able to do is provide as much flexibility for our teachers and for our students to continue to be engaged intellectually over the course of however long this is going to last. I would ask people to think about what happens in the summer. And there's a term that we use called summer slide, where you're not actively engaged and you start, you start regressing a little bit on your skill set. No one would ever say that summer school is exactly like the traditional school year. But what it does is it prevents that summer slide. What we're trying to say is, instead of saying we're not going to be in session for 4 weeks and figure it out, do what you got to do, we want to be able to provide resources and support. And our teachers are still working. They're just not working in the building. and provide the infrastructure so teachers can continue to connect with students, students can continue to connect with teachers. I would not be surprised. All the details about what's that going to look like will become much more clear after we have our teachers kind of weigh in with us.
And for Dr. Barbeau, you believe that it's only theoretical that there could be asymptomatic transmission. Dr. Birx of the White House said, I'll read a quote, "We don't want to say that the risk is low. We don't know how low the numbers are for people who are asymptomatic." So can you reconcile, what you believe with what she said yesterday?
Yeah, I believe what I said was that it is theoretically possible for someone who's asymptomatic to shed the virus, but they're not accounting for the explosion that we're seeing. It's the symptomatic people that are accounting for the spread, not just in the city, but worldwide.
On the bars and restaurants, at last count there were something like 27,000 restaurants in New York City. How much enforcement do you realistically expect can get done here? And as an addendum, why isn't the NYPD helping with that?
Oh, they will. This is literally, so this is a policy that came out Thursday with initial applicability date of Friday with explicit decision to educate and warn for the first 24 hours, and now enforcement will begin in earnest. NYPD will absolutely be a part of it. It's a huge task. Now, I think there are a lot of bar and restaurant owners and employees who have gotten the memo here because they see what we're all seeing nonstop, who are not taking it lightly. I have definitely heard reports of bars and restaurants that have spaced out their tables and are doing the right thing. I think there are others that have simply closed because they didn't think they could keep going. I believe as enforcement ramps up and word spreads that it's serious, that will help lock things down further. But again, we have bigger decisions to make soon. But I don't think it's one way or another. I think there's some places that are going to try not to do it, but there's a lot of places I think take it seriously.
I have two questions. One is about the ferries. Observers are saying that the ferries are not being cleaned as strictly or as
You mean Staten Island or you mean NYC Ferry?
NYC ferries.
We'll find out.
Also, are you guys going to ramp up service since there is like an outdoor option on a ferry rather than being in a confined space like a subway or bus?
An excellent question. On the first one, I'll check the cleaning schedule. I know EDC takes this very seriously and they're very efficient. On the second one, it's a very good point. And obviously the weather is supporting us now. I mean, we're literally on the verge of formal spring and it's getting warmer. But I don't have an answer for you at this hour. It's something we can come back to you on.
The second question I have is Cuomo this morning was talking about state hopping. If we close stores in one state, people will come to New York from New Jersey and vice versa. So Hoboken has enacted a curfew from 10 p.m. till 5 a.m. Are we worried at all that a lot of those people seeking libation will just come over?
Thirsty Hobokeners, is that the category? Yeah. I don't know. I think right now we are going through such an intense, fast transformation. I think a lot of people are recognizing the dangers, and so I don't expect people traveling long distances. I expect a lot of people to get their libations and go home, but that's just me thinking common sense. I think it becomes an interesting question as this all develops, but right now, I'm not sure that those actions are going to have a big impact on us. Everything is on the table. Curfew is one of the emergency powers I have under the state of emergency. We have not made that decision, but everything's on the table.
Mayor, one quick question and then a follow-up. With respect to the schools and the teachers going in to learn this new learning platform, some have already messaged us and said, is there a way for us to learn virtually ourselves, this virtual platform, so we're not exposed to other people? Just how would you address those concerns?
It's a fair concern, but I think the reality is not as well as they need to. I mean, we've been talking about this. It's a very fair question. We obviously worked it through. This is a battlefield condition. We're asking people in 3 days to prepare to teach in an entirely different manner. I think in terms of the sheer efficacy in putting materials in their hand and one thing or another, we're going to be in much better shape coming into the building. But of course, we're going to distance people and be respectful of that need. And there's no kids there, so it's a very different environment. And anyone who's sick, of course, should not come. Going forward, we'll do our best to keep updating virtually, but I think it's just an honest reality to teach people, many of whom will be the first time they've done it. It's hard to do all of that virtually. And Richard, I'm just trying to summarize from our conversation, right? Go ahead.
Question is, you were the mayor after Sandy, but you were the mayor during Ebola. Obviously, the idea of an infectious disease or virus in this city is not a new one.
Right.
Was there not a plan in place ahead of time to say, okay, if we were in a situation like this, how do we shut down the schools to address the understandable concerns you've raised over the last week or so, which is lunches and then healthcare or essential workers not having them?
There's a OEM, and the Office of Emergency Management, for a living does that kind of planning. Each agency has their version of that planning. But you have to be honest about the fact that it's very theoretical until you deal with the real thing. In the last weeks, all of that planning has advanced intensely in each agency. We would not be able to tell you that on Monday, March 23rd, we are going to have distance learning for 1 million kids if a lot of work had not been done already. We wouldn't be able to tell you we are going to be able to do, tomorrow morning grab-and-go meals, breakfast and lunch, if work had not been done. The same with the ability to set up alternative learning sites by Monday the 23rd for the essential workers kids. So there's a lot of planning. There's also a lot of concern that all of these things are so different than what we normally do. It will take time to get it to be as good as we want it to be, and it will never be as good as everyone being in a classroom. That's just the truth.
Mayor, can you describe your conversations with 1199 and what prompted the change of your position to close schools? What prompted your choice to close schools?
Well, those are two very different topics. Let me start with the bigger one. Look, it kind of goes against everything I believe to take a decision that I know will have so many negative ramifications. And I don't think I've sugarcoated them in any of these conversations over the last few days. I was a public school parent. I was a school board member. I mean, the notion of our public schools being closed, not for weeks, but potentially for months, and what that's going to do to kids, the notion of a lot of kids unsupervised, the health and safety problems that come with that. I mean, I could go on and on. I have delineated. It just was a very painful, difficult decision. But it became clear to me as we went through the projections that it was just necessary. As bad as in other words, you're now baking in a lot of negative impact, a lot of damage that's going to be done. But the threat was growing so intensely that we had to accept it. And I think it's kind of rare that you make a lot of decisions in this work, but where you're doing something that will cause so much harm, but unfortunately it's like a sacrifice that has to be done for a greater good. And we have never seen anything like this disease. Yeah, I went through Ebola, I went through a lot of things, never seen anything like this. So it was really seeing the latest models. They're still being perfected, but just seeing where we were at this point, talking through the ramifications. And obviously appreciating that the DOE has been working constantly over these last days to try and get a fallback ready, and they felt confident in the last 24 hours that they could provide a quality option. I needed to hear that. That was not so clear days ago, but it was clear this weekend. And the federal stimulus was also a part of my thinking. I thought a couple of days back, 3-4 days ago, that there was a question of the panic it might induce. There's a question of the way it would have an impact on people's livelihoods if people couldn't go to work. But that now has changed. I mean, so many people increasingly can't go to work anyway, and there's finally some federal support coming in and some safety net being built. So that gave me at least a little solace that we had some more room to maneuver. Vis-a-vis 1199, I mean, it's a union I think very, very highly of, worked closely with over decades. We are depending on their members. They're crucial to the battle ahead. They're the healthcare workers that will keep our hospitals, clinics going. A few days ago, they were tremendously worried about no school for their kids, and then I think they looked at other factors and they came back and said they had changed their minds. They have every right to that, but that was not part of the decision. The decision was based on all the other things I said.
Did their change of heart influence your
No, I respect them. I spoke with George Gresham. I really respect him, but no, this was many, many layers and many, many other factors that were really about 1 million kids and their families. That's how the decision was made. Okay, we're almost done. Let me see if there's anything else. Go ahead.
One of you guys done?
Oh, Mayor, 22 foster care and other social service organizations sent you a letter expressing concern about mandatory face-to-face visits and
Right.
ratios and things that they worry go against the rules
Right.
and compromise people's health. What kind of guidance are you giving them, and what should they all be doing?
It's a very fair question, and this is exactly the next level of things we're going to start to deal with. Some of the questions that come up here, our correction system, social services, youth programs. We're going to start one by one dealing with each of those. Yeah, someone, I can't even remember which day is which anymore, Andrew. I think you'll forgive me, but I think it was Friday someone called in to WNYC about in-person interviews for food stamps or for public assistance. We want to try and weed out everything we can weed out. Anything that doesn't have to be in person, really urgently, we don't want to put people in that situation, and we got to move quickly. On the other hand, we have to get people support. So on that previous question about the food stamps and public assistance, we can't see that collapse. The foster kids are depending on us. We have to make sure we have a way of supporting them. But as much doing as many things virtually as possible, streamlining, as little gathering as possible, that's what we're going to be working on.
I just want to really get some clarity, because I don't have it, and I don't think the folks at home have it.
What don't you have?
No, my mom doesn't.
You were talking about the disease or the clarity?
Not symptomatic.
Yep.
I get you're saying don't go to work if you can possibly not go to work. But what about all the other stuff? Having dinner with people, going to a restaurant.
If you're not symptomatic.
You're not symptomatic.
Okay.
Should you still stay home besides not?
So I'm going to start, and I'll let the healthcare professionals jump in. I'm a human being. I respect that doctors have the perspective, the sort of pure medical perspective. It's just like the question earlier, what are teenagers going to do? I know what teenagers are going to do. I had teenagers. I know I was a teenager, you know. Right, and so what I'm saying is, of course, we want people to just continue to reduce what they do out in the world to as little as possible. If they don't need to go to work, don't go to work. If you don't need to go out and go to events or gatherings or need to go to a restaurant, the less the better. On the other hand, I'm trying to be real, and again, the doctors can come in and be tougher, but I'm trying to be real about the fact that some people, you know, maybe seeing that long-lost friend or relative is so important to them, you know, even if it's brief. I don't want to suggest we're at the point of saying literally no one can go outside. We may say that very, very soon. I think we're saying avoid anything unnecessary. Just be really judicious about it, especially if you're sick, stay home, and if someone else is sick, don't go near them. So I'm not telling you can never do anything fun. I am telling people, you know, reduce everything you can reduce. Now, again, doctors, if you want to bring down the hammer, go ahead.
I think we've been clear, and thank you for the opportunity to make it even clearer, that there isn't a situation where there is zero risk. Unless someone is going to be hermetically sealing themselves in their apartment, given that we have community-wide transmission, there's no place that's going to be zero risk. What we want New Yorkers to do is to be smart, to be vigilant, and to be diligent about the recommendations that we've made, which include consistent, thorough hand washing. If you're not near a water source, to use alcohol-based hand sanitizer. You know, there can't be a press conference that goes by that I don't say that.
She literally does not know how to say hand sanitizer without saying alcohol-based in front of it.
And that on top of that, you know, covering your mouth and your nose when you cough or sneeze, that you need to be vigilant about developing symptoms such as fever and a cough, fever and shortness of breath, and that all of these preventive measures in and of themselves, doing them in isolation, isn't going to provide the maximal support. That all of these interventions together, layered on top of one of each other, are intended to not only help individuals lower their risk, but also lower the risk to their neighbors, to their families, to their communities. And so, you know, this drastic step that we're taking in terms of closing the schools is sort of the ultimate in terms of that preventive measure.
Mayor, you said this morning you were not yet at the point of saying you want to shut down completely everything non-essential.
Since then, you're shutting down the schools. Since then, a lot of elected officials are starting to say you should make that move. Can you say what's your thinking at this moment?
We are, so I respect anyone who calls for anything, and I'd say to them, try being the person who has to make the decision and be accountable to 8.6 million people to get it right. The human ramification of each decision is being factored in very carefully, the viability of each decision, the sort of big distance between theory and practice, trying to make sure what we decide is real and viable. We had to, in the last 24 hours, really get all of us into a point where we were certain, based on the numbers, based on projections, based on other countries' experience, that we needed to take these very radical steps right now. We're taking them instantly. There's definitely more coming, but we have to account for each. For example, in the decision on schools, and I've been plaguing people throughout the week on this, all those other factors that I've talked about, all those negatives that come with closing of schools, I have been asking everyone to answer those as best they can and show me how they can mitigate at least some of the impact. I think the DOE did a great job. I think that between Monday and now, people like Chancellor Carranza and our Chief Operating Officer, Ursulina Ramirez, they have not slept much, and they have been forcing everyone to figure out alternatives in a whole new way. So it's really been a mobilization, if you will. And I think the answers got better about how we can address some of these situations. But everything, this is the honest blanket statement. You tell me a thing that might be used, and I'm telling you it's on the table. And the second we're ready to use it, we're going to tell you.
Mr. Mayor, who ultimately came up with the decision? Was it yourself or Governor Cuomo? Just yourself.
On the schools?
Yes.
That's me. Mayoral accountability for education, obviously working constantly with the chancellor.
And also, in regards to the grab-and-go meals, is that all schools? Or
Yes.
certain locations?
All confirming, all schools for 5 days only.
Starting tomorrow or Tuesday?
Tomorrow at what time, Ursulina?
Starting tomorrow, and anyone 18 or under can show up to get meals.
And do you know the exact time they'll start?
When school starts, so 7:30.
Depending on each school's start time. Okay, yes.
You alluded to this earlier. Are the police going to be breaking up groups of teenagers who are in assembly?
What I said, again, let's be careful not to overstate it. If you got a bunch of teenagers hanging out and really close up against each other, what our officers should do is go and say, hey guys, you know what's going on, coronavirus, spread out. That kind of thing. And that's important to get. In fact, what our officers do with neighborhood policing all the time is talk to young people. So it's go in there, remind them what social distancing looks like, tell people spread out, be a little more careful, that kind of thing.
And if kids say no?
What's that?
If kids say no to the police?
We're going to, let's try the power of communication and persuasion. I think everyone knows what time it is.
You've alluded several times that there are still ongoing discussions about the future of bars and restaurants. Would you?
You're very interested in bars and restaurants, and I wonder if this is professional or otherwise. I'm really getting a feeling that you have a more than professional interest here.
Would you say it's only a matter of time until we see more drastic?
I'm not going to, again, as I'm real clear, everything's on the table. The next set of decisions, we're going to start in a matter of hours. We may have announcements tonight. We may have announcements tomorrow. Everything's on the table. If you love your neighborhood bar, go there now, under 50% occupancy, because we don't know what the future holds. But be only there very briefly and socially distanced. Go ahead.
This is for the Chancellor. What kind of be more specific about what we're doing to get hardware into the hands of kids who don't have the hardware to do distance learning? And then also the other question was, since public schools are sometimes the first line of defense against child abuse, what is the Child Protection Agency, like, do you have any plans for ramping up resources for kids?
Yeah, so I'll do the top lines, and I'm going to ask our Chief Operating Officer to give some specifics. So we've surveyed, and part of the next 4 days is also to get more concrete data as to who has connectivity, who does not have connectivity. We're working on a figure of about 300,000 of our students currently may not have those devices, so we need to verify that as well. We are working with some really large companies. Apple has really stepped up to the plate. I'll let Ursulina talk a little bit specifically about the numbers. T-Mobile has also stepped up. Verizon has also stepped up. Google has stepped up. So our big partners are really stepping up to help us make this a reality. In regards to the second question, absolutely. I'm working very closely with my fellow commissioners. We're in a whole different environment now. So we're working very closely about how do we continue to monitor, how do we continue to have a pulse, what are the escalation protocols. We'll have more details as we solidify those as well. But I'm going to ask our Chief Operating Officer to give a little more specificity on the device and connectivity question.
Thank you so much, sir. So we are working diligently with our private partners around devices. As the Chancellor mentioned, we've surveyed our principals to ask about what kind of devices our students have and what kind of connectivity that they think that they have. So as the Chancellor mentioned, we're working with Apple to supply 300,000 iPads to our students, and we will be working on a distribution method for over the next week. We are also working, as he mentioned, with T-Mobile to make sure that those devices are activated and students can use internet on those. In addition, we're working with other partners, as he mentioned, Verizon, Spectrum, and a host of people who have really stepped up to want to support our students, so I thank them for that. So you'll be hearing more from us over the next week around how we're going to be distributing those devices and what our expectations are for the devices.
They're not gifting it to us, though. We're paying.
We are purchasing the devices, the Apple devices, but obviously they're working with us on reasonable costs for the system.
So I also want to just want to add to what Ms. Ramirez just said. So obviously we're purchasing them. We're not giving them away. So they're being assigned to students to use. Obviously, they belong to the Department of Education, but we want students to have the devices that they need. And sir, if you don't mind, because you've said we all wear the same uniform during this particular situation, I want to thank and give a shout out to our comptroller, Scott Stringer, who moved heaven and earth to allow us to be able to purchase these in record time. And it's that kind of cooperation that makes a real-time response possible.
We've still got a question over here. We'll do a few more and then we're done because we got a lot more to work on tonight. You had a question about child welfare.
I did, how are we making sure that the children facing abuse are safe as far as if we're reducing the number of face-to-face visits and things like that, and we don't have kids going in schools, like how are we handing out, is there a phone number or how are we getting...
There's usually, I've worked on these issues a lot over the years, there's a lot of different nexus points out in the community historically where there are adults watching out for that kind of problem. Obviously, police are watching out for that kind of problem, healthcare professionals, a whole host of, and obviously some of that will continue. I think you're right that there's less information flowing if schools are not in session, but we have to figure out if there's some kind of information we want to get out or some kind of special effort. The work of child protection is one of those critical elements of what we do. It's very similar to what police or fire do in my book. Different kind of work professionally, different kind of skills, but in terms of protecting people's lives. So we need that work to continue, but it will be a different approach going forward. Okay, a few more and I gotta get out of here. Hold on, dudes. I am pointing at people. Let it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for the Chancellor. I was hoping you can elaborate a little bit more on the language component. I know DOE has 9 top languages, but what about parents whose languages...
Quick answers now. We have work to do.
Yep.
So I know DOE has 9 top languages, but what about parents whose languages don't fall within those?
Yeah, so more guidance will be coming, more information. We're literally building the plane and flying it right now. So we do have a whole team that's translating materials, language translation. In and of itself, we take very seriously on our website as well.
We'll update which languages it is as we go along, yes?
Is the city doing anything to prepare for potential unrest?
Unrest?
Yeah, in this very stressful time. And what's the NYPD doing?
NYPD has that concept in its planning, I think, perennially. I don't see the context for that right now, but the point is that's the kind of thing NYPD is more than able to plan for in general. Yep. Yep.
Oh, super quick. One thing is, any thoughts on suspending alternate side parking, and then the other...
We're looking at that. We have not there, but we're looking at it.
I just want to really clarify if you were just joking
joking about the neighborhood bar thing and just...
I am allowed to joke still. It's because again, guys, I know we're in a crisis, but I'm still a human being. It was my way of saying I cannot guarantee if bars and restaurants are still going to be open in a few days. That's all I'm saying.
I wanted to clarify that, and I just want to, it feels like you guys are stopping short of telling people who aren't sick or aren't displaying symptoms to stay home and cut out non-essential.
Again, we're trying to be clear about, yes, cut out anything non-essential. That does not mean that people are not going to exercise their judgment if something is particularly precious to them or important. We still understand human beings are human beings. But I'll tell you something. I appreciate the precision of your question. But if people would just do the basics, we would be in a much stronger position. So if every single New Yorker did not go to work or anywhere they're sick, did not send their kid anywhere if they were sick, did not visit anyone else if they were sick, and did not do anything that they don't have to do in terms of their day-to-day life, like if they can telecommute instead of going into the office, telecommute. We get those basics right, we're going to be in a much stronger position. I am not yet at a draconian, perfect place of saying you cannot leave your door. I would like people to keep it to a minimum. All right, thanks everyone.